So, what happens when you get a horror director to make a superhero movie? I'll answer the question for you right now. You get this. Yes, good morning everyone. I hope you've had your coffee or your tea or whatever it is you freaks like to drink when you wake up in the morning. I myself arise to a hearty shot of apple cider vinegar. The screams of my inner intestines melting away is quite the wake-up call, let me tell you. But enough about our early morning routines. You keep your secrets and I'll keep mine. How's that sound? Because today, I'm here to talk with you lovely viewers about what is, in my personal opinion, the most brutal fight scene in Marvel history. So first, before I get into it, I'd be very gracious if you'd subscribe, since about 2.1% of my viewers are currently. If this video happened to be recommended to you, please press that button. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you're a returning subscriber, leave a like, maybe a comment. Trust me, it helps with the algorithm. Now, you probably already guessed it thanks to the thumbnail and the fact that I already posted a clip of the most famous part of that scene, you know, aside from this.
Oh.
But you know me, I still like to act as though it's some kind of surprise. Just let me have this one, okay? Anywho, there's a reason I wanted to talk about this particular scene, aside from the fact that it's from my favorite trilogy of all time and from my second favorite comic book film. And that is because, for one, the idea behind it fascinates me to no end. The fact that it breaks the usual structure that most comic book films have sticks out to me like a sore thumb. But instead of a sore thumb, it's something like,
"The diamond in the rough."
Most films, and especially CBMs, follow a strict rule of the rising action, climax, and subsequent falling action. Yes, I know it's much more complex than that, but I've stripped it down so that I don't have to go on in this segment for the next hour of our lives. So here's how Raimi breaks out of that structure. The climax of the film is obviously the bridge scene, the one in which our hero faces off against the villain, rescues the woman he loves, as well as some kids, and he saves the day. Now, in most films, this would be a perfect time for the hero to have his penultimate showdown with the villain. And it actually is in the movie tie-in game, because that just makes sense if we're objectively looking at how most of these films are set up. But that's not the case for Spider-Man 1. Instead, the final fight with the villain happens after the true climax of the film, in a completely different setting even. Instead of a triumphant battle of good versus evil for the people of New York to witness, the true finale between protagonist and antagonist is a dirty, gritty fistfight in an abandoned warehouse. It's bloody, it's messy, and it's the last thing anyone would expect from a cape flick of all things. But of course, it's exactly what anyone who knew who this guy was hoping to get out of the experience. Spider-Man and the Green Goblin aren't twisting and twirling through the air. Well, maybe a little bit. They're not exchanging powerful dialogue. They're just fighting, tooth and nail, web and glider. It's so apparent that Norman has completely lost it at this point, that he's decided that merely attacking Peter's emotions
Is hard.
isn't enough. He wants to kill him. While we watch Peter desperately cling to life, throwing everything his battered and broken body has left at his foe, and we watch him fail. Now, his mask having been totally torn to bits, in my opinion, adds a lot of weight to what we're seeing as well. Up until this point, we couldn't see what Peter's expression was in any of the dire situations he's been put through throughout the entire film. But now, we get a full frontal view of him spitting up blood, gasping for air, crying out in pain. Instead of watching Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin, it's like we're watching Peter Parker, powerless, be bullied by a guy like Flash at recess. And it's a far cry from how most comic book films decide to end their primary conflict. It's not just the climactic setting that's been done away with. It's just about everything that I think a lot of CBMs feel they need to have in their climax. Imagine if instead of on the battlefield of Wakanda, or the ruins of Thanos' homeworld, the final conflict of Infinity War took place in Thanos' shack, or if the finale of the Guardians of the Galaxy happened to be in Quill's cramped and messy ship. So yeah, these are horrendous examples, yeah, so sue me. But the thing is, I don't believe a final fight needs to be so grandiose. It can take place in a dingy warehouse as long as you put quite a lot of effort into making sure that it still keeps the audience on the edge of their seat. Now, Raimi easily could have ended the climax on the bridge, having Norman be killed while trying to stop Peter from saving Mary Jane, but it was so much more powerful, and at the same time risky, to instead end it in another, far less noteworthy location entirely. And to add to all of it, the film's score, which most often accompanies the hero in their fight during a climax, is not present for most of the scene, save for Peter's final effort in pushing back Goblin's blade.
MJ and I, we're gonna have a hell of a time.
Now don't get me wrong, Elfman's score is phenomenal. It's spectacular, sensational, dare I say, even amazing. But it's the way Raimi uses it that sells the whole thing. It's completely absent as Peter is beaten again and again and again by Norman, and ever so slowly it crawls in, gaining strength as Norman taunts Peter, gloating about how he's going to kill Mary Jane, and even going so far as to pin the blame on Peter, pissing him off, just to rub it in his face a little more. And we don't just see Peter's anger rise throughout all of this, we feel it. As Elfman's score builds, so too does Peter's anger, and with it, his resolve. If I can take a quick aside here, it reminds me quite a lot of the "If This Be My Destiny" scene in Spider-Man number 33, in which our hero is facing similarly impossible odds. In both the film and the comic, Peter is hopeless. He's beaten, and he's soon to be dead. But as soon as he thinks of those who will be put in danger because of his death, or in the case of the film, is cruelly reminded of such.
Had you not been so selfish, your little girlfriend's death would have been quick and painless, but now that you've really pissed me off, I'm gonna finish her nice and slow.
He finds the strength and the resolve to save himself. Because Peter doesn't view his own death as important as those who will be put in harm's way if he is to die. Peter is able to stop Norman's blade as the score reaches its crescendo, glaring at him as the scene seems to transform around him. Whereas before, the camera angles were quite close to Peter, keeping a claustrophobic and almost eerily unfocused bead on him, as if to cause the audience as much confusion and unease as he must be feeling, as he's tossed around in this frightening and unfamiliar battleground. But after Peter finds the strength to fight back and turns the tide in his favor, we're treated to triumphant music and steady wide shots of him absolutely cleaning house with the Green Goblin, and the score keeps blasting away as Peter beats him down in a similar fashion to how Norman was doing the same to him just moments before. We see this anger in our hero's face, which admittedly is a trademark of comics Peter, but it's definitely not something you'd see from, let's say, this guy, when beating their villain. Which brings me to what this whole video really is about: the sheer brutality of the entire fight scene. The way the scene begins with a bomb exploding in Peter's face, eviscerating his mask to the point that it's just barely hanging on by a thread, has not once been topped. The battle-damaged costume, the lack of any quips or poorly timed jokes just really stand out to me to this day. I especially enjoy just how freaking menacing Willem Defo is as the Green Goblin, and Peter's genuine fear as he's faced with his greatest foe. It's a perfect fight scene. Fight me. And you thought I wouldn't mention the very end of this little skirmish, didn't you?
Ben Parker.
Godspeed, Spider-Man. Oh.
Arguably the most painful and graphic death any on-screen Marvel villain has ever been subjected to. Norman Osborn, in a stunningly comic-accurate death scene, is impaled by his own glider through a place that I'm sure we would never, ever, ever want to have a blade shoved through. His cries of agony, the blood spilling from his mouth. How on earth did this film get away with a PG-13 rating? And to me, what really sells the absolute brutality of Norman's death is the look of horror on Peter's face. He's mortified at what's happened. This man, this monster who was willing to destroy Peter and everything he loved. And somehow you can see it in Peter's eyes that he feels bad for him. It's hard not to see someone end so abruptly and so painfully. Again, the entire scene is just pure perfection and a fantastic send-off to who I can safely say is the best villain we've gotten in a Spider-Man film thus far. Now, I'm sure you might not hold the same opinion as I do on this matter, and I think that's pretty neat actually. In fact, if you think you have a more brutal Marvel fight scene, or just a brutal scene from one of the films or shows or comics in general, tell me about it in the comments below. What's your own personal Marvel's most brutal moment? And hey, if you're a YouTuber who happens to watch my content, why not even make your own video on it? I think that'd be kinda cool. It's just a fun video idea for you if you're feeling out of fuel during these long pandemic nights. And speaking of which, I'm sure we're all very tired, and I think I've made my point well enough to call it here. Good night, everyone, and remember that eating sugar before bed can cause nightmares, so be wary, dear viewers, and sweet dreams.